Books on Tape presents The Good Life by J. McInerney. Read by Robertson Dean. In middle age, there is mystery, there is mystification. The most I can make out of this hour is a kind of loneliness. Even the beauty of the physical world seems to crumble. Yes, even love. John Cheever. Cataclysmic events, whatever their outcome, are as rare and transporting as a great love. Bombings, revolutions, earthquakes, hurricanes, anyone who has passed through one and lived, if they are honest, will tell you that even in the depths of their fear, there was an exhilaration, such as had been missing from their lives until then. Ana Menendez. Part 1. Indian Summer. Chapter 1. Summer used to be as endless as the ocean when she was a girl and her family rented the gray-shingled cottage on Nantucket. Now, she found it hard to believe she was already back in Manhattan, and the kids were in school, and she was already racing home, late again, feeling guilty that she'd lingered over a drink with Casey Raines. The kids had been home for hours after their first day in first grade, and she had yet to hear about it. Women blamed themselves. Men blamed anything but. This was Corrine's interpretation of the guilt nipping at her high heels as she cantered up Hudson Street from the subway, passing the hand-lettered sign in the window of their Chinese takeout, freshly grounded coffee. Guilt about leaving the kids for so long, about not helping Russell with dinner, about attempting to restart her long-dormant professional life. Oh, to be grounded herself. 7:15 by her watch. Still attuned to the languorous rhythm of the summer, they'd just closed up the house in Sagaponack 4 days ago. She'd barely had time to kiss the kids goodbye this morning, and now the guests would be arriving at any minute, Russell frenzied with cooking and childcare. Bad mother, bad wife, bad hostess. Bad. When she had yearned to be a mother, imagining what it would be like to be a parent, it had been easy to conjure the joy, the scenes of tenderness, the pietà moments. What you don't picture are the guilt and the fear that take up residence at the front of your brain, like evil twins you didn't bargain for. Fear because you're always worried about what might go wrong, especially if your kids were born, as hers were, 3 months early. You can never forget the sight of them those first few days, intubated under glass, veined eggshell skulls and pink writhing limbs. The image stays with you even as they grow, reminding you of just how fragile these creatures are, how flimsy your own defenses. And guilt, because you can never possibly do enough. There's never enough time. No matter how much love and attention you lavish on them, you're always afraid that it will never be enough. Corrine had become a connoisseur of guilt. Not for her the stabbing thrust of regret for an ill-conceived act, but rather the dull and steady throb of chronic guilt, even as she'd done her best to rearrange her life around her kids, quitting her job to take care of them, and over the past 2 years, working highly flexible hours on a screenplay and on a project that was the obverse of a busman's holiday, a startup venture called MomTomTom.com, which had been on the verge of a big launch this past spring when the internet bubble started to deflate and the venture capital dried up. This afternoon, she'd spent 4 hours making a presentation to a possible backer, hustling for seed money for the website. As these prospects dimmed, she'd been trying to set up meetings on the screenplay, an adaptation of Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter. And here were the theoretical bookends of her existence, the maternal and the romantic, the latter submerged and almost extinct. In fact, that had been her secret intention in writing this script, to try to rekindle the romance and fan it back to life. Corrine hadn't wanted to be one of those mothers who paid someone else to raise her kids. For the first 5 years, to the astonishment of her friends and former colleagues, she'd stayed at home. Manhattan was an existential town, in which identity was a function of professional accomplishment, Only the very young and the very rich were permitted to be idle. The latter, like her friend Casey Raines, had their charities and their personal assistants, and inevitably managed to convey the impression that all this constituted an exhausting grind. Russell had initially supported her maternal ideal, though, as the years went by and their peers bought vacation homes in the Hamptons, he couldn't consistently disguise his resentment over their straitened finances, or his sense that his stay-at-home wife had become translucent, if not invisible, within the walls of their loft, a nanny without salary. Writing a screenplay was, in their circle, code for being unemployed. Finishing the first draft failed to produce the sense of accomplishment she'd expected. A screenplay, after all, was a kind of theoretical object, a recipe rather than the meal itself. And thus far, she hadn't had much luck in assembling the ingredients. So when the kids entered preschool last year, she had tried to turn her obsession with child-rearing into a profession, formalizing the body of knowledge she'd acquired as a full-time city mother into a viable online resource. If that plan didn't work out, she would have to return to the job marketplace, as much for her own self-esteem as to defray the $34,000 tuition for the kids. A homeless man was encamped in the shadow of construction scaffolding across the street from her building, a rarer sight than it would have been 10 years ago. A young, dirt-caked slacker with a ragged goatee, a bull terrier on a leash, and a paper coffee cup at his feet. As Corrine hurried past, he said, "Hey, beautiful, I need a blowjob. I need a place in the Hamptons. I need a movie role." She paused, registering the humor, and her husband would have loved this, storing it away with all the other anecdotes he used to illustrate his wife's hilarious singularity. But instead of laughing, she was thinking about needs. What we need in order to make life bearable. Suddenly coming to her senses, the panhandler gaping at her. "I need romance," said Corrine, dropping $1 in the wishing well of his cup. Whatever happened to the romance? She burst into her apartment, aching for her children, who over the course of the interminable afternoon might have died, dashed their heads against the edge of the coffee table she kept vowing to replace, been kidnapped, or forgotten her entirely. Corrine would have been less surprised at any of these scenarios than she was to see Hillary on the sofa, playing with the kids. "Mom, guess what? You won't believe! Aunt Hillary's here!" Her daughter, Story, loved to deliver news and make announcements. It's true, she wouldn't believe. Last Corrine knew, her little sister had been in L.A. She'd tried calling as recently as last week, only to be told the number had been disconnected. And now here she was in TriBeCa, reclining on Corrine's couch with Jeremy in her lap. No matter that Corrine had seen her dozens of times in the intervening years, Hillary was preserved in Corrine's mind, semi-frozen at the age of 15, the last year they'd shared a domicile, so that it was always a surprise to see her as a woman, and a pretty convincing one at that. Only a few evanescent lines at the corners of her eyes hinted that she'd passed 30 a few years before. The first thing Corrine did, pure reflex, was to scoop Jeremy up into her arms and hug him, but instead of clutching her, he squirmed. "Hey, sis." Hillary rose from the couch, stretching lithe and cat-like in her leopard top. As if to preserve Corrine's illusion of her youthfulness, she still moved and dressed like a teenager, and had the body to carry it off. "Thought I'd surprise you." I am." Corrine belatedly hugged her sister with the arm not holding Jeremy, a sister sandwich, with her son, their son, in the middle. Surprised? Yes, Corrine thought, although at some point unpredictability becomes a pattern. "You look great," Corrine said. "Thanks." "Aunt Hillary's been in Paris," Story said. "Paris?" Jeremy squirmed out of Corrine's grasp and dropped onto the ottoman. "Well, actually, I came from London today, but I've been in Paris for the past 2 weeks." "She met Madeline," Story said, holding up her favorite book. "Can you believe it, Mom? Aunt Hillary knows her. Why didn't you tell us she knows Madeline?" "I had no idea," Corrine.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?